Item 34B, the Human Covenant, has failed to achieve majority.
44 species in the Galactic Assembly's Resource Allocation Committee voted to remove humanity from its current role as primary corridor maintenance operators in the outer zone. 3 abstained. 0 voted against. The resolution passed in 11 minutes, which was fast even by the committee's standards, and the speed said something about how long the decision had actually been made before the vote was called. The official reason was cost efficiency. A Chethani-led consortium had submitted a proposal 6 weeks earlier demonstrating that automated maintenance systems could perform 60% of the tasks currently handled by human crews at 40% of the operational cost. The proposal was well-researched, professionally presented, and correct in every number it contained. The committee reviewed it, found nothing to dispute, and voted. Nobody consulted humanity. This was not an oversight. The committee's charter did not require consultation with the parties whose contracts were being reassigned. It required notice, which was transmitted to Earth's diplomatic office at 900 hours on a Tuesday morning, 30 days before the transition was scheduled to begin. The notice was 2 pages. It thanked humanity for its service, outlined the transition timeline, and included a contact address for administrative questions. Senior Diplomatic Officer Adiz Okonkwo received the notice, read it twice, and made 3 calls before she made tea. The calls were to Earth's Commerce Ministry, to the Boundary Authority's Logistics Division, and to a number that was not in any official directory, but that she had been given 11 years ago by a retired corridor operations chief who had told her, "If something goes wrong in the outer zone that nobody else understands, call this number first." Oh, she called it first. The person who answered was a woman named Chief Engineer Rin Nakamura, 61 years old, 34 years in outer zone corridor maintenance, currently semi-retired and living on a station called Herath 9 in the middle of the corridor network that the Assembly had just voted to hand to an automated system. Rin listened to the notice being read to her. Then she was quiet for 11 seconds. Then she said, "They have no idea what we actually do out here." This was not anger. It was the specific flat assessment of someone who has spent 34 years doing something that most people have never seen done, and who has just learned that the people making decisions about it have been looking at the wrong numbers. The proposal's 60% figure was accurate. Automated systems could handle 60% of outer zone corridor maintenance tasks. The tasks in the 60% were the visible ones: the scheduled inspections, the standard component replacements, the pressure calibrations that ran on predictable cycles and could be logged in advance and executed by systems that did not need to improvise. The 40% the proposal did not cover was everything else. Rin spent the next 4 hours writing a document that she sent to Okonkwo, who sent it to the Commerce Ministry, who sent it to Earth's Assembly representative, who read it and immediately requested an emergency session with the Resource Allocation Committee. The committee's chair agreed to the session with the polite confidence of an administrator who expects the session to confirm the decision already made. The session was scheduled for the following Thursday. Between the Tuesday notice and the Thursday session, the outer zone corridor network continued to operate the way it always operated, which was to say, mostly according to schedule, with continuous small adjustments made by the human crews who lived and worked inside it, adjustments that were not logged in any central system, because they were too numerous and too contextual and too dependent on the specific knowledge of specific corridors to be captured in the documentation formats that the Assembly's maintenance database used. On Wednesday, 1 day after the notice, 2 days before the session, 3 things happened in the outer zone that were not scheduled and not predicted, and that the Chethani Consortium's automated maintenance proposal had not modeled. The first was a pressure differential event in the Cathara Corridor's 7th transit lane. Not a failure, a fluctuation. the kind that happened when the lane's boundary geometry shifted in response to gravitational influences from the debris field 3 light towers away. Human crews had been tracking this particular fluctuation pattern for 11 years. They knew it came in cycles of approximately 14 months, and that the response protocol required manual recalibration of the lane's boundary markers in a specific sequence that depended on the fluctuation's current phase, which changed each cycle in ways that were not fully predictable from the previous cycle's data. Chief Engineer Rin Nakamura's crew at Herath 9 identified the fluctuation at 3:40 hours, assessed its phase using 11 years of observational records that existed in their working notes and nowhere else, and performed the recalibration in 4 hours. Lane 7 was back to nominal by 800 hours. No transit disruption. The automated system in the proposal would have flagged the fluctuation as anomalous and initiated a standard recalibration. The standard recalibration for a boundary geometry shift was a 3-day protocol. Lane 7 would have been closed for 3 days. 11 commercial transits would have been rerouted. The rerouting would have created a capacity bottleneck in the Velith corridor that would have cascaded into a 6-day delay for 37 other scheduled transits. No one on the committee knew this. Because the event was handled before it became a problem, and events that do not become problems do not appear in the reports that committees read. The second event was a structural fatigue signal from a relay station in the outer Helios drift corridor. Not a critical failure, a developing crack in the station's secondary docking frame, detectable only because the maintenance crew doing their monthly visual inspection had noticed a discoloration pattern that their combined experience of 40 years recognized as the early signature of a specific alloy's stress response under repeated thermal cycling. They flagged it, ordered the reinforcement materials from the nearest depot, and scheduled the repair for the following week before the crack reached the threshold where the docking frame would require emergency closure. The automated system in the proposal performed scheduled inspections using sensor arrays. The specific discoloration pattern that the human crew had noticed was not in the sensor array's detection parameters, because it had only been documented as a fatigue precursor in human maintenance literature 3 years ago, in a technical paper that the array's recognition database had not been updated to include. The crack would have continued developing until the sensors detected the structural failure directly. By that point, the repair would have required a full docking frame replacement, a 6-week closure of the station, and a maintenance cost approximately 40 times higher than the repair the human crew had scheduled for the following week. Again, no one on the committee knew this, because nothing had failed. Because the people who noticed the problem before it failed had handled it before it became the kind of event that generated a report. The third event was the one that Rin Nakamura included in the document she sent to Okonkwo, not because it was the most dramatic, but because it was the one that illustrated most clearly what 40 years of outer zone corridor maintenance had taught her about what the work actually was. At 1700 hours on Wednesday, a VETH research vessel on a long-range transit developed a navigational system fault midway through the Helios drift corridor. Not a catastrophic fault. The vessel's backup navigation was functional, but the backup used an older chart set that did not include the corridor modifications made in the past 3 years, which meant the vessel's crew was trying to navigate a corridor with a map that no longer matched the actual geometry. They transmitted a distress call on the standard frequency. The nearest human maintenance crew was 12 minutes away. They intercepted the transmission, identified the problem from the distress call's technical description, pulled the current corridor geometry from their working database, and transmitted it to the research vessel's backup navigation system in a format compatible with the vessel's older software. Transit resumed. Total delay, 22 minutes. The automated system in the proposal had no provision for this. Automated maintenance systems maintained infrastructure. They did not monitor transit vessels. They did not hold working databases of corridor geometry in formats compatible with older navigation software. They did not have the 11 years of experience with the specific quirks of that specific corridor that allowed the human crew to identify the problem from a two-sentence distress call and know immediately what the fix was. The research vessel would have been stranded in the Helios Drift Corridor for a minimum of 6 hours waiting for a rescue vessel from the nearest staff station. 6 hours in the Drift Corridor with a faulty navigation system and a crew of 8. Nobody on the committee knew this either. Rin Nakamura's document listed 47 other events from the past 18 months, not failures. Events, the continuous, unlogged, unscheduled, invisible work of keeping a corridor network functional when the corridor network was 40,000 cubic kilometers of space, that did not behave the way the documentation said it should, operated by vessels whose equipment did not always match the maintenance. Specifications, transited by crews who needed help in the forms that were available rather than the forms that had been planned for. 47 events, 47 times in 18 months that the outer zone corridor network had developed a problem that the scheduled maintenance system would not have caught, or caught too late, or caught correctly but been unable to respond to in the way the situation required, and that the human crews living inside it had handled before the problem became an incident, and before the incident became a report, and before the report reached any committee that made decisions about how to manage the network. The committee's model of what corridor maintenance looked like was the model visible in the reports. The reports showed scheduled inspections completed on time, standard repairs executed within projected timelines, equipment replacement cycles maintained. The reports were accurate. They described 60% of what the human maintenance crews did. The other 40% did not generate reports. It generated no records. It existed only in the working knowledge of the people who did it, and in the continued functionality of a corridor network that the committee had been looking at for years without understanding why it worked as well as it did. Thursday's session lasted 3 hours. Earth's representative, a woman named Dr. Selin Selick, who had spent 22 years in assembly diplomacy and who had read Rin Nakamura's document 4 times before the session, presented the document's 47 events in the order Nakamura had listed them. Not dramatically, not with argument. She presented each event the way Nakamura had written it, as a technical record, describing what had happened, what the automated system would have done, what the human crew had done instead, and what the difference in outcome would have been. It took 2 hours and 19 minutes to present all 47. The committee's chair, a Theresi named Vosren who had been administering resource allocation for 18 years, and who had voted for the resolution with the comfortable certainty of someone acting on well-researched numbers, listened to all 2 hours and 19 minutes without interrupting. When Selick finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "These events are not in any report we have received." Selick said no. He said they are not in the maintenance database. Selick said no. He said they are not in any document that the consortium's proposal would have had access to when it was prepared. Selick said no. They are in the working notes and the professional experience of the people who live in the corridor network and who handle what the network needs on the day it needs it. They do not generate reports because they are resolved before they reach the threshold that triggers a report. The corridor network works as well as it does because the people maintaining it are resolving problems at a level below your visibility. Your proposal replaces what you can see with something more efficient. What you cannot see is what keeps the visible things functional. Vosren sat with this for a long time. Then he said, "How long has this been the case?" Selick said, 34 years. Since the first human maintenance crews took contracts in the outer zone corridors. Chief Engineer Nakamura has been doing this specific work for 34 years. The knowledge in her document was built over 34 years of daily operation in conditions that could not be fully modeled in advance. Voss Ren said, and if we had proceeded with the transition. Selig did not answer immediately. She looked at the document. Then she said, the corridor network would have continued to function according to the metrics in your maintenance database for approximately 2 years. The events that the human crews currently handle below the report threshold would have begun to appear in the report threshold progressively as the accumulated unresolved small problems reached the scale where they could not be ignored. By year 3, you would have been looking at a significant degradation in corridor reliability across the outer zone network. By year 5, the commercial and logistical consequences would have been severe enough to trigger exactly the kind of emergency review that would have eventually led you back to the question of what the human crews had been doing that the automated systems were not. She said you would have found out. It would have taken 5 years and it would have been expensive and it would have been visible in a way that this session is not, because this session is a conversation and 5 years of corridor degradation is a crisis. You asked us to be replaceable before you understood what we were doing. We are showing you what we were doing so you can make the decision with accurate information. The committee chair sat with this for a very long time. The vote to suspend the Transitio N resolution was 39 in favor, 2 against, 3 abstentions, faster than the original vote. Not because the committee had been embarrassed into reversing itself, Vossren's record showed he did not make decisions based on embarrassment. Because the information in the room was now different from the information that had been in the room 11 minutes before the original vote, and different information produced different decisions, and that was how it was supposed to work. Rin Nakamura received the news at Herath 9 at 16:40 hours on Thursday. She read the transmission, filed it in the correct folder, and went back to the pressure calibration she had been working on before the transmission arrived. The calibration was for transit lane 4 of the Cathara corridor, which had been showing a minor irregularity for the past 6 weeks that was not yet at the threshold where it would trigger a report, but that Rin's 34 years of experience recognized as the early signature of a boundary geometry drift that would need attention before the next transit cycle. She was already working on it. She had been working on it for 6 weeks. Nobody had asked her to, nobody had scheduled it. It was simply the thing that needed doing, and she was the person who knew it needed doing, and so she was doing it, the way she had been doing things that needed doing in this corridor network for 34 years. Before they became failures, before they became incidents, before they became the kind of events that appeared in reports and reached committees and produced votes. The corridor network ran because people like Rin Nakamura stayed inside it and paid attention, and handled what the network needed before it needed to be handled in the way that generated a record. The committee had called this replaceable. They found out on a Tuesday that it was not. They found out on a Thursday what it actually was. And what it was the thing that held the network together, not the visible scheduled maintenance that the reports described and the automated systems could replicate, but the continuous invisible attention of people who knew the network the way you know a place you have lived in for 34 years. Who knew which lane drifted in which season, and which relay stations alloy responded to thermal cycling in which way, and which research vessel class used which chart format, and which combination of those things required which response at which time of day. That knowledge was not in any database. It was in Rin Nakamura and the people she had trained and the people they had trained, accumulated across 34 years of showing up and paying attention and handling what needed handling before it became a problem that anyone else would ever know about. The committee had looked at what they could measure and called it everything. Humanity had spent 34 years building the part that could not be measured. Those two facts placed next to each other on a Tuesday morning in a notice that thanked humanity for its service, had produced a Thursday session that produced a suspension and a new framework for assessing corridor maintenance contracts that included, for the first time in the Assembly's administrative history, a category called operational context knowledge, defined as the accumulated understanding of a specific environment's behavior patterns that exists in the working experience of long-term operational personnel, and that is not fully capturable in standard documentation formats. Rin Nakamura did not attend the session that created this category. She was at Herath 9, calibrating Lane 4, doing the work that had just been officially recognized as the thing nobody had known how to name. She did not need the name. She had been doing the thing for 34 years. The name was for the people who had almost made it disappear without understanding what they were losing. The name was so it would not happen again. The work continued, it always had. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, share it with a fellow HFY fan, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Your support keeps these stories coming.